Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. January 25, 1998, a group of 26 scuba divers went on a scuba diving trip in the Great Barrier Reef. It was only 2 days after the dive that Outer Edge Diving Company reported 2 divers were apparently missing from that trip. Immediately, a full-scale search operations was mounted in hopes of rescuing Tom and Aileen Lonergan alive. This is their horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. Originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Tom and Aileen Lonergan were the typical young couple who met each other in college at the Louisiana State University. Aileen was already a scuba diver then, so she encouraged Tom to try it out. Being adventurous himself, it didn't take long before Tom came to love diving, and together, he and Aileen would often go on scuba diving trips. Eventually, they got married, and in 1997, they joined the Peace Corps. A year after having joined and having been deployed to the Fiji Islands, they decided to make a brief stopover at Australia before eventually heading home to America. It has been quite a while since they went on a scuba diving adventure, so they figured making the quick detour to the world's largest coral reef system was a much-needed breather after a year of service. They arrived in Queensland and connected with Outer Edge, one of the diving companies that organizes regular scuba diving trips to the Great Barrier Reef. On the day of the scheduled dive, 26 scuba divers gathered at Port Douglas, ready for a full-packed day of underwater adventure. Aboard the scuba boat, the group of 26 headed by Jeffrey Nairn, the boat's skipper, set off for St. Crispin's Reef. Situated 35 miles off Queensland's coast in the Coral Sea, St. Crispin's Reef was a popular dive site in the Great Barrier Reef. Getting there would take around an hour-and-a-half boat ride. Upon reaching the dive site, all 26 divers proceeded to wear their diving gears, breathed through their oxygen masks, and off they plunged into the deep blue waters of the Coral Sea. 2 of those were Tom and Aileen. The dive took around 40 minutes, and as the divers resurfaced, they boarded the scuba boat and off they went. However, that was not the case for Tom and Aileen. As the couple completed their last decompression stop and resurfaced to the crystal blue waters of the Coral Sea, they looked around and realized their scuba boat was no longer there. The other divers were not also in sight. It seemed impossible to them, but strangely, it was real. They must have been left behind. It was just the 2 of them and the vast sea surrounding them, no traces of other divers nor of their boat. Being left behind in the middle of the ocean was one thing, but what made things worse was how long it took for anyone to notice they were missing. It wasn't just hours later, but rather, as unbelievable and impossible it can be, it took days before someone even noticed their non-existence. A day after the dive, Outer Edge brought another dive group to St. Crispin's Reef, the very reef Tom and Aileen dived into along with their group the day prior. As this new group was exploring and basking in the underwater beauty, a guide made an accidental discovery. He had found dive weights lying on the ocean floor. Unbeknownst to any of the guides, more so of the other divers, the weights they had found were hints to a couple in distress. Sadly, the thought of the divers being gone never crossed their minds at all. It never rang a bell. The guide just picked the weights up and was just simply delighted at the surprising discovery. The following day, 2 days after the Lonergans went in for the dive, Nairn, the boat's skipper, noticed a bag left in the scuba boat. As he opened the bag to check whose bag it was, he found a few personal items, wallets, and passports of Tom and Aileen. It was then that he realized the American couple hadn't been with them when they returned to shore that day. Without delay, he reported it to authorities, and a widespread search and rescue operation was immediately mounted. A large group of rescuers joined the search, Navy and civilians alike. Helicopters were also deployed to do an aerial search over the area and the surrounding seas and islands, in hopes that the couple might have been washed ashore. After 3 days of intensive search and rescue operations, some rescuers found a piece that gave a hint on what actually happened on the day of the incident. Along with some of Tom and Aileen's diving gear washed ashore, was a diving slate that read, "To anyone who can help us, We have been abandoned on Agincourt Reef. January 25, 1998, 3 p.m. Please help us, come to rescue us before we die. Help. The already rigorous search was further heightened. It was a race against time. Tragically, after all search and rescue efforts had been exhausted, Tom and Aileen were still nowhere to be found. Their disappearance remains a great mystery until now, with their bodies never having been found to this day. Investigators looked into a lot of angles into the couple's mysterious disappearance. One of which was suicide or worse, murder-suicide, an angle that both Tom and Aileen's diary suggested. In her diary, Aileen wrote an entry just 2 weeks prior to their trip that Tom had actually expressed that he wanted to die a quick and peaceful death. She cited he did not have suicidal tendencies but just had this death wish, which she felt she would eventually find herself caught in the situation. Both their parents contested this angle and strongly believed that, while Tom may have been depressed, authorities have completely misunderstood the diary entries. Another angle investigators looked into was that when they were left behind, stranded and floating aimlessly in the middle of the Coral Sea, they eventually fell into extreme dehydration. In such a disoriented state, they could have ultimately drowned or worse, got finished off by sharks. Regardless of the mysteries that surround their deaths, whether it was accidental or intentional, one thing was clear: the guide and the diving company definitely had to be accountable. Thus, Coroner Noel Noonan filed charges against Jeffrey Nairn. Safety protocols should have been in place and strictly implemented from the time the divers boarded the boat until they deboarded. Being the boat's skipper, it should have been Nairn's primary lookout and utmost priority. Nairn was charged with homicide. Having ended in such a horrifying tragedy, not only simply missing out on 2 divers but more so having taken 2 days to actually discover they were even missing, was not just a simple mistake of overlooking a safety protocol. It was a combination of a series of mistakes that led to how the subsequent events came to be. Eventually, the jury found Nairn not guilty of the charges filed against him and was eventually released. However, Outer Edge Diving Company pled guilty to negligence and was penalized for such a critical lapse on their part. The penalties charged were so huge it led the company to bankruptcy. To this day, regretfully, Tom and Aileen's death remains a mystery. However tragic it has been, its impact is not without a legacy. The tragedy had pushed the government to implement more stringent safety regulations such as headcount confirmations and new identification procedures. Their horrifying story has also caught the attention of filmmakers, which led to the release of the survival horror thriller movie entitled Open Water in 2003. Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, please click on the like button and make sure to subscribe to our channel for similar contents. Should you have story suggestions, drop them in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. Again, thank you, and see you on the next one.